So welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. Today we're honored to have Sophie Walker with us. She's going to be discussing 5 rules for rebellion. Let's change the world ourselves. Um, if you have any questions, please keep them to the end. We'll have a Q&A section. And if you can please keep yourselves on mute until you're asking a question, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to hand it off to Bill so you could do the intro. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everyone. Great to have some of you back once again. As those of you who've been here before know, we've been doing this. We started in the depths of the COVID situation and to keep us all as a community and share ideas and plan for the recovery of our more normal lives. And here we are over a year later, still doing it almost every week. So it's been really great. And we are so grateful to you and to Jeremy and Val and Biz and everybody who's kept this going, and to our speakers in particular. And for those of you who haven't been to the website, please go, because there are dozens and dozens of extraordinary presentations and discussions that are libraried there, and will stay available for as long as I stay alive, at least. So I'm hoping that's going to be decades to come. And we are particularly pleased to have Sophie Walker with us today. She has an extraordinary career and life history, 20 years as an international journalist for Reuters. She was actively engaged in assisting her eldest daughter through autism, and as a result of that experience, became, if she wasn't before, became really an activist of significant proportion, focusing on disability rights, particularly for girls on the autism spectrum. In 2015, she organized and led the Women's Equality Party. She ran for mayor of London in 2016, and in 2017, she stood for election to the UK Parliament. Her campaigns focused on investing in care, equal pay, an end to violence against women. She's a feminist strategist, an activist, a speaker, a counselor to other campaigners. She's also the co-founder of Activate, a UK fund to support women from minoritized communities to stand for political office. And on top of all of that, she's also the author of 5 Rules for Rebellion. Let's change the world ourselves. It's available on Amazon. I urge you to order soon, because when I ordered, there were only 9 copies left available. And I would say I have read it, but I haven't received it yet. So I assume it's coming from the UK. So my expected arrival is by the end of the month, but pick it up and hurry. Only 8 copies left.
Well, thank you.
So Sophie, please take over. And again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I am making notes to have a word with my publisher about making more copies available as soon as possible. I have to say I am really delighted to have been asked to talk about activism. It is one of my favorite things. And also right now, let's face it, it's pretty clear that the people in charge really need our help. We are a year, effectively, a bit more than a year into, a year and a half even, into a global pandemic that has entrenched inequalities and exposed the painful inadequacies of policymaking by and for a small, overwhelmingly male, non-disabled, straight, white collective. And we are starting to talk in many places around the world about rebuilding, and yet we are still facing massive questions about our economies, about our societies, about our priorities, and how we relate to one another. And we are still confounded by daily evidence of the fragility of our earth, of the yawning gulf between rich and poor, what community means in a globalized economy, and whether technology is freeing us or trapping us and setting us at odds with one another. I would say each one alone of those issues is huge. And when you put them together, they can really feel overwhelming. So let's start from that place, because I think we probably all know to some extent what it feels like to be overwhelmed. It takes a very lucky disposition, I think, to sort of leap out of bed every morning feeling sunny about one's prospects. It's interesting because today I realized Facebook reminded me it's 4 years to the day exactly that I got the results from my political campaign in the British general election of 2017, when I lost my deposit and my seat, well, the seat, it was never mine, and a lot of pride to the successful political candidate, who was a man who has suggested, among many, many things, that disabled people should be paid less money. And it was probably about a year after that that I really succumbed to a tremendous feeling of being very overwhelmed. I think at that point I'd been a campaigner and an activist, generally a fairly impatient agitator, for about 10 years. As Bill mentioned in his lovely intro, I used to work as a news agency journalist for Reuters for about 20 years. I was very curious about the world. I wanted to travel, I wanted to tell stories, I wanted to find the spaces where we connected and the spaces where we could really learn from each other. And I covered news, trade, politics, economics, war. And then during a 5-year period of trying to get a diagnosis for my autistic daughter, I became, by sheer need, a lobbyist, essentially, for equal rights for people with disabilities and their carers. And there was just so little in terms of support for us both that I had to build it, and also build a wider understanding of why we needed it. And from there, out of impatience with very unwilling politicians, I helped build the Women's Equality Party, which was Britain's first feminist political party. And there were thousands of us, thousands of women, really weary of being told to wait for equality, like it was either something to give out like breadcrumbs when there was a bit of extra food on the table, or some sort of impenetrable problem that we'd come back to when we'd fixed, I don't know, Syria or Brexit. So we organized to create a political alternative to the parties that kept putting women's perspectives and lives on the back burner. Now, over those 4 years that I was leading WEP, the landscape changed dramatically. We had the EU referendum when Britons were polled for our opinion on our continuing membership of the European Union. And a discussion, what was supposed to be a discussion about identity and community, turned really quickly into a horribly divisive fight, which I'm sure is a very familiar scenario for a US audience, in which xenophobia, fake news were wielded by establishment chancers masquerading as men of the people. The billionaire in the gold lift who pretends he's just like you. And during this horrible campaign, a very diligent and thoughtful female MP, Jo Cox, was murdered. Donald Trump was elected. And it felt for a while like racism and sexism and misogyny were not just being celebrated, but presented as something you could actively vote for. And that was really weird, as the leader of a feminist political party, to have to sort of understand the extremes that I was now dealing with. On top of that, Britain was marking around 10 years of cuts to austerity budgets. And I remember during that 2017 election campaign, knocking on big houses, with multiple cars in the drive, and having voters come to the door and say, I just don't think the cuts to welfare and housing benefit are deep enough yet. So yeah, I lost my deposit. I lost the chance to change that community. I continued to campaign, so did thousands more women and men seeking representation and rights. We called for affordable childcare, an end to violence against women and girls, equal pay, equal representation, reproductive rights. And increasingly, as party leader, I was frequently invited to debate these things as one side of an argument that could plausibly be challenged by a misogynist in a nice suit. The quality of political debate was essentially pantomime, and the tidal waves of abuse, social media, my inbox to my face. I had people crossing the street to spit at me. I was hustled out of locations I was meant to speak. I was taken in around the back of radio stations to avoid waiting thugs. And the world just got more and more and more divided, and the rage and the pain was, it was just breathtaking. And I really got to the point where I thought, there's nothing I can really do here to make a difference. People kept telling me I was a crap politician. People kept telling me I was a crap feminist. Eventually, I concluded that the only meaningful way to be an activist in this kind of soup was to get out of the way for people who are better at it than me. And so I stopped. And I spent many, many, many weeks lying on the sofa with the curtains drawn. Watched every episode of The Good Wife, which I thoroughly recommend. But my brain kept going back to this sense of how do you do this? How do you do this and sustain it? How do you campaign? How does one nourish one's sense of activism as well as one's sense of oneself? My working draft for the book was how to be an activist and not go mad. I realized eventually that activism is a philosophy. It's not a series of pitched battles. And if I could work out the rules that together would sustain such a philosophy, I might be able to sort of, get back on the horse. I might be able to persuade more people to come with me. I might be able to provide that nourishment and that sense of community that so many of us feel detached from when things feel really dark. So how did I do it? Well, I spoke to lots of activists. I interviewed lots of very interesting people and asked them for their recommendations, who else to talk to. I read a lot of books, new ones and old ones. I found solace in a lot of very old books. And I have to say, I went to Homebase. And for those of you who don't know, this is a major chain of home improvement stores in the UK. I thought activism is challenging work that requires mastery of certain skills, patience, and a care for results. I thought, I know, I'm going to go and ask do-it-yourself people what they think they can do about the state of the world. So I rocked up to my local branch of Homebase on a very, very cold Sunday morning in early winter. And there were lots of people there preparing to make their houses secure, clear out the gutters, mend the loose tiles. And I went up to them. These were in the days when you could still go into shops and strike up conversations with people and we weren't wearing masks. And I said, you're obviously pretty good about fixing things. How would you fix the world? And it was fascinating, the answers I got. It's all a mess. That was quite common. Nobody listens. There's nothing I can do. I wouldn't even know where to start. There's absolutely no point. And, as we know, this kind of pessimism is not just limited to North London. Public attitude polls have long shown that majority of the public don't trust politicians or institutions. And among women in particular, the UK charity Young Women's Trust found last year that around 70% of young women had lost confidence in politicians. By comparison, Credit Suisse recently found that 1% of the population now own half of the world's wealth. So, you put those two things together, you can clearly see a general feeling there's not a lot we can do about inequality. And I think that feeling of sort of pushing away, a sinking feeling, is a response that many of us are long trained in, and deciding that maybe your best chance to survive the storm is just fix your own roof. So then I started to figure out the first rule for rebellion. The slow climb back from the sofa would be to defeat despair. Oh, so easy, right? But when you look closely into your despair, you will find the way out of it, because that's precisely the moment when you recognize when you recognize how daunted you are by the sadness around us, you are simultaneously recognizing that you do want more. And I discovered this line in Middlemarch by George Eliot, where she wrote, "What we call our despair is often only the painful eagerness of unfed hope." And that, I just found that so sustaining. And I also thought, well, God, we really should be listening to the advice of a woman who had to take a man's name in order to fulfill her creative ambition in a world that was organized to keep her quiet. George Eliot, whose real name was Mary Ann Evans, did not keep quiet. She wrote about her belief in people's abilities to work towards a better society. And she also understood that much of our society is organized to foster despair. It's built by the winners to keep everyone else subdued. The people in power rely on your feelings of powerlessness often, not always, but often, to keep them in their places. And there is a psychological concept called learned helplessness. And that describes a state in which our inability to control our environment can create a really deep and undefeatable depression. So, as despair is structural, so must our response to it be. Progress doesn't happen by tweaking broken systems, but by creating new ones. And that requires new ideas, like yours. Now, you may have been holding off in the hope that someone is coming to the rescue. No one is coming to the rescue. Hooray! Now you can liberate yourself. An interesting thing often happens when you decide to defeat despair. The process of letting yourself feel how you really feel can often result in feelings of extreme anger. The closer you connect to the hurt caused by the world's unfairness, the more furious you may become. Tuning into our anger is challenging. And again, as a feminist, I say it is particularly so for women. How many women have been told by men they do not know to smile and cheer up simply because our going about the day face was not expressing placatory contentment at all times? A woman's anger often provokes indignation, fear, and aggression. We are hysterical or over-emotional. But if you ignore your anger, you're turning it in on yourself instead of figuring out what's really going on. Your anger has information for you. Listen to it. Collaborate with it. It will show you what really matters to you and what to address. And when the people who benefit from the status quo try to depict your anger as unnatural, know that your anger is working. The response to you is an emergency override response from the system. Your angry self is the blinking light that says, this system is failing. So that's rule 2. Channel your anger in order to make something better with that energy. Now, a lot of people don't like angry feminists, apparently, so they keep telling me. But I tell you what they find a whole lot more alarming, and that is an optimistic feminist. And that is why we are now going to talk about hope. When I was a little girl, I had a second-hand book of Greek myths. Beautiful, beautiful illustrations. I loved most of the tales, apart from the story of this really boring woman called Pandora. Pandora was sent off to marry Epimetheus, who was the brother of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and made them furious. Pandora's wedding gift was a box that she wasn't allowed to open. She was to take it into the land of men and not open it. But of course she did. And out of the box flew all the worst things in the world, which interestingly in this children's version were summed up as whooping cough and unkind stories and sums that never come right. Total disaster. So then Pandora sees at the bottom of the box a lone last thing, which is of course hope. And so the story in this child's version ends with a marvelously dismissive line. So you see, although Pandora did let loose everything that is disagreeable in life, she set hope free too. As a child, I thought that was totally rubbish. But I realize now what an interesting character Pandora is. The first human woman sculpted out of the earth by the gods and bestowed with charm and beauty by them, and then sent to live with men as their epic punishment for stealing. As the Greek poet Hesiod put it, she founded the deadly race and tribe who live amongst mortal men to their great trouble, women. Now, I don't think the great trouble that women cause is sickness and bad sums. And I don't think that the most troublesome thing about women or any minoritized communities who don't resemble the gods is the sickness and the bad sums. I think the most troublesome thing that we bring is hope. It's the hope that we bring into the world. As a class of people who are oppressed not by the gods, but by man-made laws and structures, the most daring thing you can do when you're outside of those laws and structures is hope. Hope requires discipline and endurance. It requires that you get out of bed every morning and reset your determination to make things better, no matter what setbacks you face. Hope is an action, and to act, well, that's how you change the world. Hope is a key asset for every campaigner. As the author Rebecca Solnit puts it, hope is not a lottery ticket that you sit on a sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It's an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. So you've cast off despair, you've channeled your anger, you've seized hope as power. Now you have to find your people. Change doesn't happen because one individual speaks up. Change happens when you build a movement, and connecting with other people requires an open mind towards those whose experiences will be different from yours. Collaboration is at the core of successful activism. Offering up your idea to be considered by others makes it stronger and more beautiful. When you get all the edges knocked off, you get multiple refractions and reflections and shines in the light. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to offer up those ideas. And I've seen so many good ideas wither because a person couldn't share them or felt personally attacked by criticism. This happens particularly in this age of social media that encourages us to do battle rather than do discussion. And because so many of us bring our personal experiences into activism, disagreement can feel like a personal attack. But listen, activism isn't therapy. It's not about making space for everyone's feelings. It's about getting shit done based on a clear understanding of what everyone's aiming for, and agreeing which structures we're all going to dismantle and why requires respectful and rigorous debate. And that's where you need empathy, because working with others often means being comfortable with being uncomfortable. It means doing the work to discover the extent of what you don't know. You have to turn I into we. And that is the fourth rule of rebellion: compassionate collaboration. Next up is rule 5. Now, I usually would have some photographs to show here, which I regretfully do not today, but look up Catherine Switzer. She was the first woman to register and compete in the Boston Marathon in 1967. And when you look up pictures of Catherine Switzer, you will see that you'll see typically a black and white photograph of her running with a bib on, with a very angry man trying to catch up with her and seize at her. He's pulling at her clothing and he's furious. He is the race organizer who hadn't realized from her application that she was a woman. And he is trying to, in those photographs, snatch away her bib, and she was shouting at her, "Get the hell out of my race." She went on to finish. And in 1974, she won the New York Marathon. Now, being an activist can feel like running a marathon with people trying to push you off the course. And I also say that as someone who has run several marathons and not been pushed off the course. You do need to look after yourself. You need to stay fit. and you need to sleep. You need to eat well. Developing those habits can sometimes cause you to be deflected into just trying to fix yourself. It's a very easy trap to fall into because we do hear so many messages that things will improve if only you had no physical imperfections. Green juice and mindfulness are lovely, but they are not the solution to structural inequality. And that is what's making you sad. Look, activism is tough. Campaigning is mostly losing. You have to make your case over and over again. You have to figure out how to be strategic and where to find your allies. You have to break down a vision of hope, a huge, glorious thing, into daily actions that you do again and again with purpose. And that is the fifth rule of rebellion, practicing perseverance. Among the many activists I interviewed for my book were Bana and Fatima al-Abed, a Syrian daughter and mother who brought the world's attention to civilian lives during the ferocious bombing in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Through cluster bombs and bunker buster bombs, they sent out social media messages despite being afraid for their lives. Bana, who I think now is probably about 11 years old, now meets world leaders to ask for security for children still living in conflict zones. I asked her mother, Fatima, how do you keep going? And Fatima said to me, we have to keep faith in trust and in love. And that's really the essence of it all. Activism is trust that the world can be a better place and love for the people who are taking this leap of faith with you. It is the most rebellious thing that you can do. And I really hope that my 5 rules for rebellion can help. Now, I would normally end here, but I wanted to make some last comments about lockdown activism, if you would find that useful. Some of the things we might have learned about organizing during a pandemic. First of all, I would say that at the heart of being locked down is its biggest contradiction, that while people are banned from moving, the world has been changing faster than many of us have ever seen. What was presented as fact has been turned on its head. Low-skilled workers, our carers, our nurses, are often, in fact, our most precious assets. The magic money tree of state spending does in fact exist. Britain's Daily Mail actually briefly even welcomed Romanian fruit pickers to our shore. Now, many of us welcomed this recognition that normal was a system of protections and choices for a privileged group. Many others want to return to it as soon as possible. I remember at the end of March last year, so like days into the pandemic, Charles Moore, who is a former editor of several right-wing newspaper outlets in the UK, was on Radio 4 arguing that an emergency is not the same as normal life. And he was oblivious to those for whom every day pre-pandemic felt like an emergency because policymakers didn't see them. And over the last year, I've read tweets that said, we have to end the lockdown because the left are enjoying the crisis. And one commentator wrote of a proposal regarding minimum income for the poor, money for nothing will not buy happiness. COVID-19 rendered certainties into uncertainties. And if we want something new from the fall of the old order, we have to grab for it right now, because you can bet that the people who like the status quo are absolutely right now fighting to reinstate it and entrench it. I became an activist over 10 years of fundraising, lobbying, campaigning, learning. I started off simply running marathons in order to raise funds. I helped build a new party, I set up Activate, I'm doing law strategy. And I know that I and we do not have 10 years to do this next bit, but we are learning a lot and we can apply it quickly. So the first thing I would say is get your head in the game. As we've discussed, being an activist is a philosophy for life. And if you understand that philosophy, it will see you through many difficulties. Channel your frustration into what philosopher Martha Nussbaum calls transitional anger, the energy to create something positive. It might be harder to march and to take to the streets, although we have seen in the last 12 months the power of street protest regardless. I think you really know who you are on the street. When you stand shoulder to shoulder like that, there is a surge of electric recognition that is really hard to duplicate anywhere else. But digital, while it feels smaller, can be much, much bigger. And I was fascinated and thrilled to see Greta Thunberg very quickly tell her followers to start avoiding mass rallies and find new ways to advocate for change, which was when the Fridays for Futures Digital was born. The hashtag digital strike online process connected young people right around the world. It grew the movement exponentially, and it strengthened global bonds. It built a much stronger movement. So some very effective activists started online. Another young woman I interviewed for my book, Amika George, started the Free Periods campaign for free access to menstrual hygiene products as a UK student aged 17 with an online petition. So I think creating digital content is a great way to find your voice. It's a great place to hone your message and to find your allies. And there's never been such an audience for new things to read and to get involved in. And nor has there been this kind of opportunity, this access for many previously marginalised groups to be heard. The UK Parliament has organised virtual committee meetings and debates by a video link. I would love that to be the start of a move to digital that offers chances for disabled people, people with long-term illness, carers, other overlooked groups to finally participate in policymaking for the better. Although, of course, right now there are members in the House of Lords currently arguing we should stop doing this and return to normal. I think it's also worth reflecting on the fact that isolation connected many of us much more closely to our communities than free movement ever did. Over here in Britain, sharing pictures of rainbows and clapping for carers were community moments. Organising support via WhatsApp groups for the ill, the shielding, the vulnerable, the elderly. I think many of us went from not really knowing our neighbours that well to knowing many of them much, much better. And I think, you start with shopping for each other, you move into a plan with each other about what do we want our communities to look like as we start to lift lockdown. I would also say there are real challenges in trying to mobilise and advocate for those in deepest need, those without digital access, those who are focusing simply on survival, for whom rainbows in the windows, it feels like a frippery. I think emergency funds for those in direct crisis really matter. That's some of the stuff that I've been involved in organising over the last year. And so does very much listening to what people need, really checking that you are not offering top-down solutions, but that you are building those solutions by creating space for those most in need to lead the way. One activist I spoke to recently started by leaving bags of food in unused telephone boxes so that those in food crisis could collect them without shame. She also went round and asked everyone in her neighbourhood what languages they spoke and organised collective translations of vital government information on the pandemic. She crowdfunded for and is now giving out no questions asked grants for migrants struggling to access state support. A last thought. Some of the things I think I have really learned in the last year: you have to embrace technology, but you also have to embrace activism to ensure everyone has access to it, whether it's, whatever connectivity that is, from Wi-Fi to data or, phones. You have to be open to thinking differently. Much of what worked before may well not work in a year's time. But failure is how we learn, and every campaign is different, though each campaign can offer building blocks that you can use in different patterns in the future. You have to keep adapting to people's needs as people's needs change. It sounds so obvious, but you'd be surprised how many campaign writers fail on that point. And I think the last thing I would leave you with is don't underestimate investing in participation. How we do it, how we think about it, how different groups need it, where the power of persuasion sits, and how different perspectives bring breakthrough. Thank you very much. I really hope this has been useful, and I'm looking forward to a conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been really a great presentation. I think you approach this with a very empathetic point of view and compassion that we're severely lacking these days. I'll see. Okay, Jen has a question. Jen?
Hi, Sophie, thank you for being here with us.
It's so nice to see you.
You too. I just wanted to say something that I wasn't going to bring up, but once you started talking, I thought, you know what, I should bring this up. When you mentioned about how much the world has changed and how much it has changed so much recently, I just wanted to bring up an example that happened to me this week. So in the past, so I have a website and I write sometimes, and through Facebook, I'll boost a post. And in the past, like I've paid to boost a post, and you get a bunch of comments or likes or whatever, but it was never like in the past anything major. And just this week, we started to relaunch some new posts, and I boost a post, and this particular post actually had like my face on it as well, and saying that we were relaunching. And the comments that I received were horrible, and they were absolutely like, "This is a scam," because it was World Moms Network, and she's looking for another baby mama. Like it was just
Oh my
really, really demeaning,
Yes.
And so I was ignoring those, and then I get to this one woman, and she seemed mad, and she was like, "What even is do you even have a phone number and an address?" And I thought, well, okay, she's got a fair point. Let me message her. So I messaged her and I said, "Oh, we don't have a phone number, but here's my email address, and here's our PO box, and this is what we're all about, and sorry that wasn't available for you." And I thought, oh my goodness, how is she going to write back? Because is it going to be something that's really nasty? And but I don't know, something made me do this. And she wrote back to me and she said, "I'm really sorry. I don't know what I may have written on your Facebook post, but I was kind of just having a really bad day that night, and I was kind of taking it out on the internet." And I was just like, that's not what I was expecting. And it kind of made me think like, okay, all of that, I want to say, crap that we see of these people that feel so brave and everything on the internet, when we're trying to do some good in the world. It kind of made me think, well, what if I thought about those things that she said? Like, what if a lot of people were like that? They're just hadn't been too much to drink that night, or people are just saying stuff from that place. But I think prior to that, I take everything so personally, and I think like, oh, that's so heartbreaking when people say those kinds of things. And so I just wanted to get your perspective, because I know that you face more than just a Facebook boost post.
Yeah, I think that is a lovely story, and I would encourage you to tell it far and wide, and also have contact details on your Facebook adverts. I think it's a thing, isn't it? I think using social media to get rid of your frustrations. I think one of the things I think I learned most of all about engaging on social media is to look for the people who are engaging in good faith, right? And I think your antennae becomes more and more attuned to that the more you debate and discuss in those forums. And I used to start by feeling that I had to get into an argument with every single person who was trying to have an argument with me. Initially, because I felt like I felt a lot of responsibility, certainly as the leader of the Women's Equality Party, to sort of present our case and make a case and talk to the confused, and generally, martyr myself to the hordes of internet trolls. Many, frankly, it was a lot of trolling. And then I sort of very quickly thought, I can't keep doing this. It's exhausting and depressing and actually really hurtful. When you go to bed and your phone is pinging with abuse. And then I sort of thought, well, okay, how do I make sure that I'm still in the same spaces as people who disagree with me? Because the last thing I wanted to do was to, it's a huge temptation to just shut it all down and get yourself into that bubble. So it's like, how do I ensure that I'm still in a space of people who disagree with me, but want to discuss in ways that are not personally attacking or hurtful to anybody else? And so then I just started to screen it out. The trolls just block and mute. The people there were, and then which are the forums where I can do this, right? I mean, I don't think it's possible to do that on Twitter anymore. There was a brief point where it was. Now on Twitter, like, you say your thing and you get out of Dodge. I mean, it's just not a place for discussion. it is a place where you step out your sand and then you say, now come find me in the real world, or here's somewhere else where I will be. I think it has been a long journey for me to understand how to deal with whataboutery, how to deal with like hate crime, and how to work your way very carefully towards finding the people with whom you may never agree, but with whom you may find some common ground somewhere. And I think a really key part of that is also having someone who will take your phone off you and switch it off and put it in a drawer and order you to go outside for a while. So yeah, that's it that's my version. But I love that story, Jen, and I feel very cheered by it. So thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
I had a comment. I didn't have a question, but I loved how you call this rebellion. And it's such a soft way of being rebellious that might actually catch people off guard. And I love it. And I really, really love it. It's very, very, very good. And I also, apart from everything that you said, something that's stuck in my mind is like being comfortable about disagreeing. And what we have seen lately, or at least I have seen lately, is that people are not comfortable debating and arguing. People think that they need to win, and they forget that there is a winning in itself when you exchange ideas, and then you learn, and you might come out of the conversation with new ideas, new processes that you know.
I love that. I love that. I love that idea that winning is simply in the exchange of ideas. That's brilliant. I may borrow that. You may see me tweet that quite soon. That's fantastic. And you're so right. You're so right. I think some of it comes, I think some of it is because social media encourages us to be gladiatorial. I mean, the algorithms are written to make us into individuals so that our likes and dislikes can be hammered into data that is then sold on to other people. Like, it's very deliberate. It is not a space for, I mean, we have found ways to build communities, but that's not what they're trying to do to us on there. So yeah, that combat is so hard. But what I also see, and particularly from doing a lot of work in the women's sector, is that a lot of people who are coming to this work are coming with really painful experiences. You know, they are survivors often. They have lived through elements of trauma. They have become activists because of something really life-changingly awful often that happened to them. And so when they bring that experience into an arena and say, as a result of this is the stuff that I want to do and that I care about, and somebody says, I disagree, I don't think that's important, you know, it can feel like a really personal attack. And I think there has really been I understand the response that is to be, I will only speak in safe places. I will only speak to people who sound like me. I will only speak on the understanding that everything I say is to be protected and respected. Now, obviously, I would only ever want to work and discuss in spaces where everything we talk about is respected. But I think there is, and that's why I sort of, I say activism is not therapy. It's not, if you get to the point where the space we're in is simply for sharing our feelings, then we've stopped moving, right? If we're sitting in a circle talking about our feelings, we're not marching, and we need to be marching. Now, that's not to say we don't need time for sharing feelings, but yeah, I think the point you made at the beginning is far more eloquent than anything I have subsequently said, and thank you for it.
I don't know if there are any other questions. I have a question, if I may.
Of course.
So I think your description of this moment, especially when you talked about the money tree, magic money tree, that it didn't exist before and we didn't believe in it, and now with these effectively UBI, especially in the States, a lot of people are asking those kinds of questions, and I think it speaks to the paradigms we lived in before and now we live in currently, where a lot of people are starting to question those limits. And I guess my question for you is, I feel like that was already difficult before this moment, especially being a woman and being in that activist space. How do you convince people who don't think women should have equality? Is a really difficult thing. How would you say or if you've had any experience in your mind changing because of these experiences, or changing others' minds and kind of going outside of that paradigm, kind of changing the paradigm for people? Because I think that's part of the social media discourse, is that we get into our silos.
Yeah.
We don't want to challenge what our paradigm is, especially when that paradigm is constantly being put on us by society. So how would you challenge?
Gosh, I flip-flop on this, I have to say. A lot of what we did on the Women's Equality Party was to be very deliberately non-partisan, and to say that, you know, women's equality, feminism is not something that belongs to one political party, that it's not a thing of the left, or indeed a thing of the right, if the right should ever want to lay claim to it. But it's something that everybody should be able to get behind for a whole range of reasons. And the other thing that we did as a political party was to say, we win when you steal our ideas. So yes, we're going to field candidates, and yes, we're going to knock on doors and do leafleting and all the sort of traditional, and we're going to stand up at hustings and deliver amazing speeches, and you're all going to think, oh my God, they're amazing, I'm going to vote for them. But we also are in the race so that other people steal our ideas. And it was that, I think, is fundamental. And it comes back to a little bit, I think, about what is it Irvis was saying, which is the win is when you exchange ideas. You know, the win is when someone hears something different. The win, you know, I remember when I ran for Mayor of London, and it was 10 months after the party had started. We'd barely been going any time at all. I had gone from being a reporter to single mother to leading a political party. I was having like moments of extreme, like, what? How did this happen? And I remember, I'll tell you this very short story. There was a hustings, there were lots of different hustings, but there was this hustings, the first one I ever did, which was at the Royal Geographical Society in London, London Mayor. And we were fighting to get a seat in the hustings because we were a small political party. And the organisers were like, no one's ever heard of you, you don't stand a chance, forget it. And we were like, come on, well, let us on. And we eventually did a deal with the Evening Standard, which is the London's newspaper, that they would let me speak at this hustings that they had organised at the Royal Geographical Society, if we could do a stunt, which was to bring me on stage at the last minute as the surprise entrance in the race. So it was all like, you know, a bit of pantomime. People love a bit of pantomime. That's the other thing I would say. You want to get ideas in people's heads, go along with a bit of pantomime, because it never, you know, it always helps. Anyway, so all the candidates were on the stage, and then I sort of enter, you know, stage left, ta-da, it's the feminist candidate. And I kid you not, to a man, you could see the other candidates go, oh shit, like now we've got to talk about women. Like, does anybody know anything about women? They're like texting their special advisors. Have we got anything about women? Have we got any, you know? And it just turned it like that. And at the end of that debate, the guy, you know, Sadiq Khan, sort of came and found me in the green room, and he said, you're not going to win. I'm just going to steal all your ideas. And I said, great. Then, you know, set to it. So I think there is something really fundamental in this idea of winning and losing, and about exchange of ideas, and about making ideas something that anyone can own. That ownership of idea, the sort of, yeah, the democracy of ideas, really, that is a really, really important part of just like changing the perspective a little bit. Does that help? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have 5 more minutes. Yes, Professor Van Dyck.
Yes, Sophie, that was really great, so interesting. what do you do though, and you speak of sort of the democracy of ideas, when society is structured in a way and rewards and promotions and grants and everything are based on that it was your idea, that you presented in a key journal or something. And there's so much quarreling and so forth. Like even if you have a graduate student assistant whose idea might have been, and then the full tenured professor will take that idea and not put the other person's name on the article. I mean, there are so many conflicts even in academia about that. And it goes way back. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton engaged in very fierce quarrels with a French scientist who actually, there are theories about it by Frank Sulloway on birth order, and he was a firstborn and the other man was a secondborn, and secondborns often a little more meek than firstborns. Said, all right, you can take the credit for these discoveries, but it's a real thing, it's actually very undemocratic in many ways. So how do we work around that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I have been asked versions of this question in many different environments. There's a version of it I often get asked when I do sort of women's networking events, often in businesses, where there's a question about, well, we're doing all this work, but nobody's listening to us, or how do we work with men so that they will listen to us and not be, and be our allies, and I think that I mean, it's a long haul. I'm not here to say, I'm not very Mary Sunshine here. I'm not going to say, well, you lean in. I hate the whole lean in thing. I can't stand it. And I think it has done untold harm to the last generation of women, I think, actually, in that business space, who have, all you need to do to deal with centuries of oppression, discrimination, and misogyny, ladies, is try a bit harder. I don't believe that. And I think that, I think what we can do is organize. And I think women have organized outside of those spaces. Women have always had to organize in their own communities. They've always had to organize to have their voices heard. And women and men in minoritized communities. I think what I've always said to women sort of in those very restrictive spaces is find your allies, work together, build a community. And I see it a lot in the clients that we represent at McAllister Oliverius. We do an awful lot of work with plaintiffs who have experienced employment discrimination along lines of sex or race. We've done a lot of work in the university sphere. We do a lot of work in the medical sphere, where often, again, academics, researchers have been sidelined. And I think I think one of the things I really want to do is to be able to demonstrate the what one can do with law, with civil remedy. So increasingly, I've always been a community organizer, and I think that is essential. And I say community meaning academic communities and business communities, but I also think there is a piece about civil justice that we're only really starting to play with and define. And I think that's going to be very interesting going forward.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all. It's been great. I wish I was there. But good old Zoom.
In the future, when we're all back in the fall.
Yes, please.
So before we close out, I just wanted to give you the space if you wanted to say any last words.
Oh, I can never do last words. It's
Okay.
I can't, it's too, yeah, there's too many words. Listen to all the words and talk to each other. And I would genuinely, this is always an opportunity for me to learn. And so, I'd really love to know if any of you, if there's any thoughts or reflections, please send them my way. Come and find me. I'm on Twitter, at Sophie Running. You can find me, Jen, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Sophie Walker Official. Come and find me. I would love to continue some of these conversations, please. I'm sure I've got a lot to learn from all of you.